So if the conversation gets heated in your classrooms, what do you do to diffuse it? Maybe take a mindfulness break? I mean, what do you do? You know, to bring it down, because they're too elevated to be mindful.
Anyone else?
I have some ground rules.
Okay.
And one is one person talks at a time. You don't get to talk for other people. You can say I, me, but you can't say we. You can't represent your views as other people's views. And sometimes if people get really heated, before I will allow somebody to disagree, I make them summarize what the person before them has actually said. And really emphasize the idea of listen to understand before listening to respond. And so even though maybe we can disagree, we at least understand what we're disagreeing about, and hopefully do it in a respectful way.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. I lay out, the stage. I set the stage so that people understand, or students understand, that they should be experiencing levels of discomfort based on their own socialization. Right? Not everyone is going to agree with everything, right? But that we are once again problem solvers. And I like, throw in the popular culture references and humor, right? Just lighten the mood, But I also, you have to have those rules. No ad hominems, no attacks on a person's character, religion, sexuality, etc. I lay that it's all in the syllabus. I emphasize it early and often.
I misread the time, by the way. We have 5 minutes. Apologies. Yes.
What did Harvard do?
Yeah, what did Harvard do?
Harvard didn't really respond to it. And this is also this past October. And I'm hopeful that Harvard had some conversations about it and maybe had the opportunity to lean into that conversation, talk about the purpose of clinical education being first and foremost an educational experience and not an atmosphere to kind of weigh your badges about what causes are important to you. But also, I hope kind of those substantive conversations, you'll know one of those clinics was a Right to Life clinic. And I hope that would provide an opportunity to have conversations about, well, who would your client be in that setting? And when you think about that, it's, people aren't out there being forced to have an abortion. So what is the controversy? And use that as an opportunity to explore the substantive law and hopefully get into the ethics of lawyering and talk about the fact that you can represent a client with whom you disagree with their viewpoint. And representation of a client does not equate agreeing with the conduct that they engage in. And also, hopefully, that led to conversations about access to justice. And that part of the role of clinical education, although not the primary role, but part of it is to address the fact that they're underrepresented and underserved communities, that we can both accomplish goals of training our students to be lawyers while providing advocacy and representation to communities who are in need of it. And so, I would suspect that some of those conversations happened at Harvard. I'll confess that a lot of this was discussed on the Twitter sphere in great detail. There were emails and blog posts and that sort of thing, but I do not know what Harvard actually did in response to that letter.
Yes.
When discussing issues like race or class or gender, how do you get students who do not identify with the group that you are having the discussion about? It's sort of like the opposite end of your question. How do you get students to be more comfortable engaging?
Well, when I talk about things like racism, for instance, contextualize, go to the civil rights movement. I like images, visuals, and there's nothing better than to have images of the march or the lunch counter protests where blacks are joined basis, right? Explain as advocates, as supporters, what they're doing there. Be sure to point out that they are not the driving force behind it. That they don't, like at the lunch counters, they never experience as much abuse as you know, the blacks that came in and violated those social norms. But I like doing it that way. I like always engaging and saying, look, you know, don't feel alienated here, right? You know, consider how we've gotten to this particular point, and you know, and consider these inclusive sort of protests. And like I said, visuals really help.
It's that other emotion that gets released, not just rage, but also guilt.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? How do you channel that?
I'll share a little response to that too.
Yes.
In my classes, which are mostly concepts underpinning artworks, if I'm showing images of artists who are talking about controversial topics, what I find the biggest thing that helps my students is my own comfortability to talk about the topics. And then if those who in the classroom may be contracting, like either physically or emotionally or mentally, for myself to not contract to their contracting, and to really create the sense of it's okay to talk and to be comfortable about it, because they're looking to us to say, is this okay? Is it okay to talk, to have opinions, to discuss? And if they feel that that atmosphere is created to have more comfortability.
I wonder if you could address, I think sometimes as faculty we're hesitant to go into this terrain because we may confuse safety and comfort. I wonder if you can talk to that distinction between safety and comfort. No?
Oh, are you talking to me? I'm sorry.
Anybody.
Well, and let's define some terms. So what do you mean by safety and comfort?
Right.
Well, that's the question. I think discomfort is okay in the classroom dealing with these issues, but there's a certain discussion about safety that I think is also appropriate. So that's what I'm trying to get at.
So by safety, are you suggesting protecting students who might be vulnerable, protecting students who might have challenges thinking about things in a new way?
Yes, and perhaps maybe even having that discussion about sort of norms, dialogue norms in the very beginning of the course, and sort of subjecting those norms to some type of analysis, right? So.
I mean, you know, in terms of that level of discomfort, again, equating that level of discomfort with a necessary process of learning anything new, right? Separating that from, again, by letting students know early and often of what's coming up, to let them make that choice if they, because, obviously, learning something new through critical thought, the discomfort of cognitive dissonance, it hurts, is far different than, going into a lecture on sexual assault if you've experienced that sort of thing. Then we get into the realm of being unsafe for that particular student. And that's why I reconsidered the whole idea of making these announcements early on in terms of trigger warnings and so forth.
Any other burning questions? Yes, we go.
It's a question about the perhaps strategies to engage other students. I guess as somebody who teaches art and design, I get a lot of students who do works about their own sort of traumas or issues that they bring into the classroom. Just as an example, I had a student who did a very effective video piece about anxiety and their anxiety attacks. And it became a challenge within a critique structure to get other students to really engage with that topic. So it became sort of in a group context, a one-on-one conversation. And I was hope to avoid that and to engage a broad range of student voices. So within these challenging topics that you bring up, do you have strategies to engage students who might otherwise remain silent, feel they have nothing to contribute? And for me, there's this sort of split between the objective critique of the artifact that's created out of the project, and the concepts that underpin, or the ideas that student brings in this particular example, their own sort of personal anxieties that the work is about.
I think there's a profound power in stories, because you can never disagree with a story.
Right.
A story is true, a story is what it is, And a story can be an incredibly powerful form of advocacy and persuasion, frankly. And I think
Well,
that...
I guess, can I flip that around? What if the story is not told well? I guess becomes part of the question. So it's a powerful story, but then the strategy with which the student is trying to communicate that story in as effective a means as possible, that becomes the area that's subject to critique perhaps. But it also, because the story is so powerful in and of itself, that the form with which the story is manifested gets pushed out of the realm of critique. So we can't actually help the student perfect the telling of the story.
Sure. Sorry, I'm going to stand so that I can see you, Aaron. So in my classrooms, working with art or if any other context, is I try and bring it back to each student on whatever level that they can potentially engage with that topic. So if the topic is anxiety, maybe other students in the classroom may not be to the point that they are diagnosed as having anxiety attacks, but probably everybody in this room right now has experienced anxiety, right? Has anybody here not ever experienced anxiety? Okay, great, because I need to talk to you. So then bringing it back to that, of engaging my classmates or my students and saying, we're looking at a presentation right now about anxiety, but for each and every one of you who are looking at the students' work, think of a time when you have felt anxiety. What was that like for you? What was your body feeling? What was going through your mind? Were you feeling fight or flight mode? And so each individual may connect with depression or exclusion from society to degrees that we represent in gender, race, and ability and sexuality. But to some degrees, we have all felt some level of exclusion, maybe in minor parts, or anxiety or depression in minor parts. And what I try and do is just to access those little bits that we have all felt to help give a level of empathy and understanding to maybe the overarching, bigger topics that we may be discussing on these larger platforms and in that student's work.
Let's give our panelists a hand. Thank you so much.
Yeah.